Okay, this meeting of the Oregon Education Investment Board State Investment Subcommittee is now convened. Seth, can you please take roll?
David Reeves.
Here.
Matt Donegan.
Here.
Hannah Vandering.
Here.
Nicole Maher.
Okay. I'd like to review the charge of the subcommittee, and then we'll hear some comments from Chief Education Officer Rudy Crew. Charge of the State Investment Subcommittee is to provide guidance and expertise on the development of an outcome-based budget, align to initiatives, contribute to the design of an analytic framework, and provide expertise in assessment of results and make recommendations. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning to all. And I don't know, is Nicole on? Is that?
She's not on yet.
Okay. I think, as David just pointed out, this is a subcommittee designed to do some of the hard work of both hearing from and attempting, in this instance, to respond to the queries around the outcome-based budget as it relates to some of the specific priorities that have already been sort of put out into the public space. Our hope is here today that we'll not only get a chance to talk among each other, but also to hear specifically from people who may or may not have gone to any of the other community forums, yeah. And as a result of that, maybe are anxious to talk through some of the priorities that they've heard so far, or perhaps advance new ones. So I look forward to hearing from you.
Okay. And Kathleen, do you want to report to us on some of the outcomes from the community forums throughout the state?
Sure.
How many were held? How was attendance? And what was some of the feedback we got?
Sure. Before you go there, can I just say a word on behalf of the governor about what he hopes this subcommittee and the OEIB can do in the next couple of weeks, or do you want to hold that for a different?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So the governor's in the middle of preparing his recommended budget for education, and his hope is that the OEIB, working through this subcommittee, will provide through discussion or through a more formal mechanism recommendations to him with respect to key priorities in that budget. So just as the program funding team presented some recommendations, his hope is that this committee would reflect and refine on those, bring to the full board, based in part on consideration of the public input that it receives at community forums and in these subcommittee meetings, sort of additional refinement of recommendations that can help inform his recommended budget.
Thank you. And yeah, with that in mind, what I wanted us to look at today, and it's on the agenda, is 4 specific initiatives, and then in future meetings to explore more things around priorities in the budget and investments.
Great. Thanks.
Kathleen.
Sure. To date, we've held 6 community forums. We've had more than 750 Oregonians attend the meetings. Many teachers, parents, community members. Post-secondary has been well represented, especially with students. Some of the key concerns are inadequate funding, too much testing, class size. There's been strong support for librarians and counselors. At the post-secondary level, tuition has been a key issue, and the view that there's been a disinvestment in higher education, as well as concern for the EFT recommendation that 30% of the post-secondary formula be allocated on the basis of each institution's success on achieving outcomes. The report that it's a draft report that you have in front of you. The responses to date, we've had about a 21% response rate, and there's a breakdown. It's mostly teachers, parents, and students that have responded, and community members. Teachers being the largest single group. The ranking to date of the EFT recommendations, the top rank is elementary and secondary education, followed by Oregon Reads, early learning, supporting students and families, developing a representative core of professional educators, special education, a tie for 7th with English language learners and college credit before high school completion, followed by post-secondary education and longitudinal data system. The form that we used in the beginning, it has evolved over time. In the beginning, the form listed the EFT recommendations on the front. We got pushback that people wanted their responses to be heard, so we flipped the form. The front of the form is for the people to fill out. They can also provide information on the back and rank, as well as rank the EFT list. So that's where we are. Tonight we have a webinar, and we then have 2 more community forums. One at John Day on the 5th, and tomorrow night in Bend.
Did you see any patterns emerge from it? I mean, you mentioned funding, lack of funding, too much testing, class sizes, more counselors, librarians,
Right.
post-secondary, lack of funding, tuition cost, and the performance, 30% performance budgeting. Did you see any other patterns emerge from the...
That's the key ones. Those are the key ones so far, and we'll be diving deeper, and we are receiving responses via email. We will be getting more of the forms that we handed out. Several college students were taking them back to their universities and community colleges to get input as well. So we expect to get a lot more information over the next week. And Hannah and Rudy have been at the meeting, so they might have
Hannah?
input.
So I've attended all of the meetings, and people are angry. People are really angry about funding in Oregon and want to see something different than what came from the EFT. They want to see something where we're actually addressing the issue of investing in public education. They're crying out for a recognition of what the realities are in our schools, and the need to have the OEIB address those issues by looking at revenue, is what I think we heard. Portland was a really intense meeting, and it is continued on throughout the state around, as Kathleen has stated, class size is out of control. Parents are feeling like their students or their child is not receiving a quality education because they're in a class that has over 30, over 40, over 50, up to 60 students. The lack of any reference to counselors in the EFT report and their importance in the work we're doing has been pointed out. I don't think that we've really had, when we look at the 4 initiatives, strategic initiatives, I don't think that people have really focused on those initiatives because they're upset about some of the EFT. The special ed funding mechanism that is called out in the report. The community college especially, the students are struggling with being able to afford tuition at the community college and higher ed, and they were very disappointed that the EFT would bring forward the recommendation on the 30% funding on degree completion. So, I think the one thing that you don't get out of this document is the passion that all of these 700 plus individuals that have attended these meetings have for public education and their desire to see us do better.
Any other comments or questions for Kathleen?
Well, I would say that I think that I would divide the comments up into different levels of passion. On the one hand, I think what Hannah said is exactly right. There are some people who are very disappointed that this doesn't speak specifically to the priority that they view as being most critical in their own world, whether it's counselors or specific dollars for the Oregon Opportunity Fund and the like. I mean, there are some very specific dollar investments that people are hoping to hear about, and did not see them represented in the EFT report, and as a result, they expressed a fair amount of concern about that. A second level of this passion, however, was on the issue of wanting ultimately to have an opportunity to use this moment to really talk through what the investments that they believe, at least, could and should be, including some of the things that were on the list. They might not necessarily see this as the highest priority in all cases, but they at least liked the idea that there was some thought being given to the idea, to the notion of let's get outside the box here. I saw this particularly from some community college people, some higher education deans, et cetera, who were expressing desire to really get at the issue of teacher education, for example, and really put some dollars behind the support of a framework designed to do that, and the like. By the same token, I heard very, very large concerns about how that might ultimately be done, more from their level out as opposed to the top level down. So it was a sort of a process issue for them. And then I heard people actually, in some instances, being actually pretty excited about that this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity we need to essentially align resources in ways that we had not had the opportunity to do in the past. That, yes, they wish that there was more money, but that for some, the issue of being able to move forward with an eye toward a more or a different redesign of the allocation dollars, that we stand in the breach of being able to do that right now. So I heard it at different levels. I just simply wanted to make sure that we captured some of the other sort of gradations of thinking that I heard from that night, or those nights.
Yeah, I think I got, you know, there was a lot of unhappiness over the lack of funding, and I think the thing is, it's hard to propose new initiatives when people see the existing structure not really being fully funded or carried through, more importantly. And I think if we are going to discuss new initiatives here, they're going to have some connection to that. So I think that's really going to have to, we're going to have to keep that in mind in our conversation. We can't be doing a disconnect between the current state of the schools and anything new we're proposing. In fact, it should be addressing a lot of these concerns, hopefully, or in some way. If not, there will be a disconnect.
Right.
Anything further for Kathleen, Hannah?
Well, I'm not sure how if we're going to talk about the 4 initiatives, I'm disappointed that we haven't been able to engage at the forums more about those, because I'd love to hear. I think, you know, when you talk about the idea of having quality professional development across the state in the first initiative, we can't get past some of the other language in that report and in what's going on. We can't get people past that, and I'm wondering how we can get to the point where we can actually engage the community in a conversation about what if and how do we, if this is a priority for us, if we're going to take any amount of money out of the state school fund, it has to be done in a way that people are going to commit to, or people are going to understand. And I'm just thinking in future how we set up the conversation around the initiatives versus, since that's what we're focusing on here, I'm struggling with trying to leave the conversation that I've heard across the state and the loud and clear about where people are and what their hopes and dreams are for the future, and these 4 initiatives. So struggling how to get there right now.
Go ahead, Mr.
I agree that it can feel somewhat disconnected, so let me try to talk about the sort of data points that got me, at least, into the business of some of the pots, or some of the areas that I had as a priority, because I do see them connected, actually. The research on student performance is probably never more clear and more prolific, really, than around the issue of every successful student starts and has a continuation of being involved with a successful teacher, a very good, high-quality teacher. The logic of that is irrefutable, and the question about it is, how will Oregon then put before every child a high-quality teacher? And I think it's fair to say that both in Oregon and around the country, while lots of things have gone on to try to do that, we're at best episodic in our outcomes. It's a mixed bag in terms of how well we support teachers, in terms of how well we provide additional professional development opportunities for teachers, etc. Districts, for the most part, are trying to do this very much on their own. They're trying to recruit on their own. They're oftentimes going across and getting people from other districts to get them to come into their districts with minimal dollars, and people stay for an average of about 3 or 4 years. Nationally, that number is actually a tad bit lower than that. So, in my mind, this whole question of getting a high-quality teacher in front of every Oregonian student made complete sense. It follows true to the research in this area, and it is particularly true in specific content areas like reading and mathematics. The Gates Foundation did some work in this area not too long ago, and found that this was one of the leading indicators of people who actually were able to participate in high-level mathematics and analytics in both high school and community colleges or post-secondary, that they had a successful, content-rich teacher in this area. So, at least from the standpoint of why this particular bucket, I think it is, on the face of it, it's actually pretty clear that this is about supporting and giving a whole new emphasis to both teachers and teacher development. With respect to reading, you know, and arguably there were some comments who came up that night about writing. With respect to reading, the real issue here is, and I'll say it as straight as I can, I don't think that any state in the union has gotten this right yet. I think we still fundamentally have a tale of two cities here. You've got some kids who leave 3rd grade very competent, very polished, very capable in the area of how they understand language and how they can use language to advance their own academic success. And you have lots of students for whom this is a devilish of a content area and they don't do very well. When you look at the numbers, you see that those numbers are largely driven by, the negative numbers, if you will, are driven by people whose first language is not English and by poverty. And if we stay true to the existing map we're on right now, we will end up with, again, Oregon training and giving opportunities and providing a level of proficiency for some 3rd graders and not for others. And so, to me, this just made sense in a 40-40-20 context that we have to spend some time talking about reading. In the meeting before this, we just talked about this need for attending to the issues of remediation in community colleges and colleges. If we stayed any longer and we had a conversation with the prison system, we'd be having the same conversation about literacy. So fundamentally, if we don't get this better, or if you will, more right than we have in the past, then we're just doomed to repeat some of the same elements in the past. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not questioning the initiatives and their validity and the need to move. I'm talking about the realities at which our parents, our students, our educators are dealing with right now, to look at doing something that doesn't, adding something that doesn't alleviate some of the issues that they're dealing with. They know that poverty is an issue, and that, I mean, a quality teacher, of course, but how do you have quality professional development offered, I guess, is not delineated out here real well about what that will look like for those who have a class of 32 first graders. How do they get that professional development? When does it happen? I mean, I mean, I've read through these. I get the 4 initiatives. I'm just talking about that conversation with Oregonians has not been able to take place because of, frankly, I think some of the language embedded in the FT report.
Let me say one response to that. I agree that the getting over the initial hump, if you will, of how to help people see this is a big conundrum. It's an issue. And one way I think of being able to do this is to think about these priorities as we are now hearing them and as we've already advanced some, but putting this on a platform that is 2 biennium, the width of 4 years, if you will, as opposed to 2. What we've got right now, it seems to me, is a huge problem that we're trying to essentially identify priorities and a financial response to in a 2-year period. And I just think that the size of that problem exceeds the time frame within which we seek to resolve it. So I think if we actually thought about these priorities in the context of a 4-year look, what does it look like, you know, biennium 13 through 17, as opposed to, you know, 13, 15. We might end up being able to say something more specific about, well, where do counselors fit in this picture? Where do funding formulas fit in this picture? Where does class size reduction fit in that picture? I think it's a reasonable thing for people to ask, and certainly it's an appropriate thing for us to try to answer, but I don't think that the current framework is going to allow us to get into the kind of answer that we'd like to be able to structure, because it's just simply the time horizon just simply won't cooperate with the agenda.
Yeah.
Just the origin of the work that the funding team did and that really we're engaged in now was a 10-year budgeting model process that the governor initiated this year, early in the year, that asked the funding teams in the various outcome areas to consider what priority investments to make now in order to optimize results over a 10-year horizon. And I know as he looks at, you know, where to spend dollars between education and public safety and healthcare, sort of the big buckets, a fundamental consideration is what does this mean for 10 years from now? I think I say that just to really reinforce Dr. Cruz's remarks that the advice he hopes to receive from the investment board is advice that really puts these 13, 15 recommendations in the context of a broader trajectory that will be required to reach these longer-term educational goals. And I think the funding team approached that as well. I mean, from the outset, understood and established that the ambitiousness of our goals have not been met by corresponding levels of state investment, that we can't get to 40-40-20 on today's dollar or the dollars that are likely to be available in this 13-15 budget. So the challenge then is, what investments do you make today in order to put us on a path towards to secure additional investment and to get to 40-40-20. So it's very much in that sort of 10-year frame that the governor is asking us to think about these recommendations.
Anything else for Kathleen before we move on deeper into these initiatives? Thank you. Well, I think this is important. We're going to have to look. Maybe we can't do all 4 initiatives now, and maybe we shouldn't be doing all 4 initiatives in 10 years either. So I think we should be looking at them and seeing particularly how they'll have an effect short term with the current disinvestment we have in public education in the state, and even with an eye long term about what we can be doing now with some targeted investment that's hopefully prioritized right with the current structure to be affecting some things long term. So can we start with these, say, shall we take them one by one?
So what's the framework then? Is this a 4-year, are we looking at this in the context of a 4-year look? I mean, I just want to be sure we have
the charge is really, what I want this subcommittee to be looking at is just a prioritization of first, second, third, fourth. And I think from there we can go on either with the OEIB or more in the context of the governor's budget itself about how long-term or short-term those would be. And it could be even pieces of them too. I mean, it doesn't have to be the whole initiative either. But I think we should be at least setting up prioritization to help the board and the governor understand which are the ones we should be moving sooner with. So what was the first initiative?
So,
okay.
Dr. Crew, do you want to continue through talking? I think you talked about professional educators a bit and Oregon Reads a bit.
Okay, go ahead.
You want to just give an overview, and then I think you might have to leave.
yeah.
Then I can fill in some of the
Okay.
details and studies that we pulled out.
It's on literacy. Probably don't need to say much more about that, except to say that the structure for that was a structure that, in part, was or assumed an early learning component to this. That the first leg of this journey really started at 0 to 3, age 3, and that we needed to spend some time talking about what is the right deliverable or structure for delivery of better literacy skills in the home, including parents. And we had a conversation about the hubs as a mechanism for being able to do that. There was a conversation about the grade 3 proficiency level standard, if you will, that essentially that standard remaining the same. Then the question became, well, then how do you get students to a level of proficiency by grade 3? What strategies do we do to that? Where are the places where it's being done very well right now, and how would we scale some of that? With respect to the later grades, if you will, the whole issue of being able to catch students up in reading then allowed us to spend less time and money on their remedial education as they then got into both high school and community college, and then subsequently into post-secondary. So the ideal world that we are trying to create prior to 40-40-20, or prior to the acquisition of that as an outcome, would be a world in which we actually didn't have as high a cost and as high a number of kids that we actually have to put through a quote-unquote remedial program of some sort. Because these programs come at a much higher unit cost than almost anything else we do in the system. In the K-12 system, I mean the pre-K-12 system, or in secondary school, post-secondary schools. It's just an incredibly large amount of money. It's kind of like the genie that gets out of the bottle and you keep spending money chasing it and you can't ever pay enough to get it. You never do. Oregon is no exception. This is true around the country. I'll move on then to the other areas.
Can we stop right there?
Oh, sure.
Do you want to do questions on each one, or do you want to?
Oh, sure. No, I'm happy to
Okay.
refer each one.
So with, I'll do the Oregon Reads. I do have a question on the professional educators. But so in this initiative, when the funding team, and David, you were on that, was working, was there conversation around libraries being closed across the state, and school libraries and school librarians being cut, and that impact that they had that has on our students?
There was some of that, and I think there was a little bit of excitement too about putting more of a priority on libraries and school librarians for that matter too in this program. So I think a little bit about revitalizing that, hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I speak?
Sure.
And so if you look on the Oregon Reads Initiative under increased reading support and opportunities for reading, the last bullet is about expanded access through libraries, community centers, child care and healthcare schools settings, to books, curriculum resources. So many of these initiatives are not, we're calling them new initiatives. Many of them are not new initiatives. Many of them are looking at things we currently invest in, maybe bringing them under the sort of umbrella of a OEIB focused strategy, sort of putting a brand on them, leveraging them by making them higher profile than they currently are. And the library issue was one that the team recommended, really looking at whether we should be increasing our funding for libraries or at the very least leaving it steady.
Is there any research, because you've got the evidence here that you've shared with us now, is there any research on the impact that school librarians have on reading? Is there? I'm sure that our state association of librarians could help us with that, but I'd be interested to know that, and I think it's a conversation because, again, when it comes time for the districts to have to make those tough decisions about what they can and cannot fund, that has been one that in some of our larger districts has recently gone away. So I'd be interested in seeing that and how we would share that message out if we were moving in the direction of Oregon Reads.
Can you get that for next meeting?
I can.
And the other question around this is the parent engagement. I know that, Dr. Cree, you've done a lot of work with parent engagement. Are there some specific strategies that you found to be effective with parents and reading and getting the involvement of at home?
The clearest one is for there to be a dedicated amount of time that parents spend in inquiry, in games, in song, but around language use. And the experience itself, the research basically says that the experience itself has transferability into cognition. That when kids are having a great time, and they are experiencing that in the context of a caring environment, that they transfer that and they hold that as a sort of a baseline for how they then believe themselves to be experiencing learning, and that then transfers into school.
Matt?
Dr. Crew, just going back to the first strategic question,
Yes.
Around professional educators. I'm looking at the outcomes, and from that, really deducing what the problem statement might be. And one problem is obviously a lack of diversity that we're trying to address. We're trying to match the educator population with the overall population, with the student population. And I can see we've got a target there for 10%. Second one would be increased rate of teacher retention, which would imply that right now attrition is a high priority or a high priority problem. And then the third is the specifically addressing the focused priority school. When I step away from that, I'm wondering how much of this is really transformational versus incremental? I can see that there's a transformational component with the diversity, because I think that's a pretty big goal that we've got in there. What I'm really seeking is, to what degree are we trying to fundamentally transform or change pedagogy and really retrain our teachers for giving technological advancements, pedagogical advancements, versus more just kind of continuous improvement.
I'll say something. I just want to add, I think there's one outcome really missing there, which is just improved student success. That I see a lot of what's coming here, the stress on the collaboration. You've heard the acronym PLC, professional learning communities. And I think just the re-professionalization of education, something similar to what they've done in Finland, for example, and really building a professional core of educators. And I think at all levels is what's important about this, from early learning to post-secondary. But I think that I think a lot of the stress right now is just go in the class and teach, and that classroom instruction time is all that's valued. And I think there's a lot missing there that either the 9th grade team or the department getting together, or even cross curriculum with ESL and non-ESL teachers, things like that, and actually talking about the specific students is what I'm seeing through in here, some of the collaborative things. So I would like to add that outcome to it, that there would, I think that would be transformational itself, the increased student success we'd see from that attention to the individual learner that really takes some time out of the classroom among the professionals working with them.
Dr. Cruz.
Okay, go ahead.
Just maybe to put a somewhat finer point, this might help your response. Just reading so much about the advancements in pedagogy and technology and so forth, what I was somewhat anticipating was really that being the focus, and then looking at potentially collaboration with other states that are doing the same thing, and therefore leveraging our limited funds and really trying to make some small target investments, but having these 4 to 6 regional centers, perhaps parts of broader communities that are trying to, again, leverage these major technological, pedagogical advancements. And I didn't see so much of that, and I'm wondering, is that embedded in here and I'm just missing it, or is this, again, somewhat more continuous improvement?
Your question is a good one. So the way that this has been both thought about and then written is essentially sort of macro and micro. So let me describe macro and hopefully answer your question in that context. So the bigger picture here is improved quality and support for the institution of teaching and for those who teach. The specific outcomes at a macro level would be that there would be, by and through these centers, and through and with the collaboration of colleges of education and superintendents and teachers, that there would be the following kinds of things that would accrue. Number one, that teachers would be engaged in the building of curriculum and assessments. That the world is pretty clear about, most of the other world is pretty clear about the value of teachers in both describing what should be taught and how it should be assessed. And in this country, we have, for the most part, sort of dictated that both by textbook publishers as well as a whole host of other intermediaries. This would essentially put teachers in a driving position of building course content or curricular content, building it in relation to pedagogy, building it in relation to technology and technological advances, building it in relation to global standards, and the latest research on everything from brain theory to to new and different tools by which to deliver it. So the first objective, the first macro calling here would be that these centers would be places where new knowledge would be constructed. And that new knowledge would pertain to both content as well as the assessments. A second macro sort of objective was that these centers would allow for best practice to emerge from the field, and it would then be shared or shareable in a dissemination network that allows for the transfer of this practice via technology or via mentorship of teachers or through scholarship of teachers. That is to say, the scholars of our day in our industry, the scholars of our day are sitting in our classrooms. Sadly, many of them retire before they ever get acknowledged in their sort of emeritus status. We don't tap it. We need to find a way in Oregon of tapping into that scholarship and disseminating it both statewide, but exactly what you were saying earlier, nationally as well. Which brings you to the third macro outcome, which was that we would actually begin to create networks that would accomplish two things. One, it would accomplish the onboarding of new teachers and a way where they would come to know about the profession by virtue of having maybe even in a point-and-click environment, but they'd have models available to them. They would have assessments available to them from practiced teachers who've done this work before. They could make it take advantage of emails of teachers that they might be able to talk with about their coming in. I'm going to be a math teacher my first year in. Who could I talk to? So it's a little bit of the PLC work. But we need networks where this new knowledge and the vibrancy of the minds of the people in Oregon who have been doing this work and doing it with stellar outcomes in performance, where that gets to be the shared commodity, if you will. So at a macro level, these hubs were really intended to combine universities, schools of education, really good practice, put it into a place, and then mine it from there and share it from there. At a micro level, the things that are on this page really speak to what's the low-hanging fruit that we need to get by this year to demonstrate that this was worth it anyway. And that's what you see before you here. We've got to demonstrate that we've got the ability to get on first base before we go all the way around, so to speak.
Anna?
So on this one, it seemed to be all over the board about what we were trying to do. In the outcomes, especially, the number of professionals who are non-white, non-Hispanic. And it doesn't really speak to that. What you were referring to doesn't, I don't think, really focus on that. And the increased rates of teacher retention at Title I eligible schools. I don't understand why that became an outcome. As we're talking about having a high-quality teacher, our districts hire the best, and then our job is to provide a quality professional growth and evaluation tool to help them, because no one is a master teacher when they walk in the door. So we want to help them along the way. We talk about a performance evaluation. Is it about a performance evaluation? Are we looking through Senate Bill 90 to create quality professional growth and evaluation tools to help every educator who is working in our schools with our students know exactly where they are and what they can do to improve, and they can set their goals? I think we've got a good thing going with the work that's being done creating those tools, and I'm not sure how this language in here fits in with that.
Let me try to answer the first question,
okay.
The first part first. Again, these are expressions of what do we have to do more incrementally right now? What do we have to do to demonstrate that we can and should have a bigger sort of commitment to the professionalization and the support of teachers. I don't think you get from where we are today to a bigger entitlement, if you will, without demonstrating that there are some incremental gains along the way. One of the places where I thought we needed to demonstrate that we could, in fact, do this work and do it at scale was, can we get the same kind of results by having quality teachers in front of our Title I students in our Title I schools? Can we get that part done this year? Can we begin to actually put in place more and more highly trained, high-quality teachers in our schools this year, such that we actually affect the bottom line in the number of students who are or the number of schools, rather, that are low-performing schools in the state. We have, I think it's right around, Margie, you'll tell me, I want to say 90. Is that an accurate number? 89 or 89, something, 80 plus low-performing and priority schools this year. That is an extremely high number of identified sites. So the idea was that we actually should be thinking about how we could support the highest level of instruction, the highest level of use of assessments, the best practice in those places that are immediately what I think of as low-hanging fruit right in front of us that we could actually begin to affect change in this year.
I think Whitney, did you want to add something?
Hannah, thank you for your input, and I wanted to just give the opportunity for places where the language is rough. I would love feedback so that we can make sure that this document reflects the thinking of the committee. And then on the outcomes, I think in addition to being sort of bounded by needing to have some outcomes that show some immediate progress, we are sort of bounded by the information that we have available to us as a state. And so these are, while they might not appear to be the most, maybe not the most reflective outcomes, they're take into account the information that we have available. But to the extent this subcommittee is able to make recommendations for, a different outcome or more outcomes, I think that's the part of what this process should be.
Anything else on this initiative, Anna?
So I just need to understand what you just said around the 90 low-performing schools. Is it thought that there aren't quality teachers in those schools, or is there what?
No, I'm sorry if that's what you took away from my language.
Yeah.
Okay, so we try it again. The thought is that rather than to engage in a bombardment of accusations about who's at fault for having 90 low-performing schools in a state this size, let's not assume that it's a teacher's fault or a principal's fault or a parent's fault or anybody else's fault, but that what we have is responsibility. And let's assume a collective responsibility for making an investment in the people trying to do this work. That investment would take the form of looking specifically at how to support and help and give, if you will, best practice, new models, new strategies, new ways of using assessment, new ways to organize classrooms, arguably additional library support, arguably additional counseling support, should that be the way that the committee wants to go. But arguably those things represent additives to a very difficult set of circumstances that these teachers face. And so the question that we were trying to respond to was, well, what would we do to support that? And what we would do is to try to provide them with those assets as they are in these really challenged schools.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Matt?
I've got my own macro and micro comments as well. Just on macro, and Whitney and Dr. Crew, I do think your comments around multiple biennia, whether it's 10-year or 2-year, extremely helpful, and I think would provide a lot of context for why we've got outcomes listed here as we do,
Right.
particularly wanting to demonstrate momentum. That makes total sense.
Right.
And so somehow I would recommend macro, some global language that really makes that abundantly clear, because otherwise, I think that explains a lot of the questions that you've already faced here, is that why did you come up with this and so forth. So I think that's very helpful in Ben's comments around this being part of a 10-year budget and so forth. So again, I just recommend that. On the micro, I just would, to a certain degree, echo Hannah's earlier comment. I like the 10% outcome, and I like the fact that we want to focus on demonstrating progress. I also didn't see the specific language above it that would show how we're going to achieve that. I think all the other language seems on a standalone basis to make perfect sense, but then when we introduce that bullet, it does beg the question, how do you get there from the prior language? So if you could maybe draw a link there, I think that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Shall we proceed then? There's two more initiatives. Supporting students and families.
Again, this is an area where just a little bit of the same conversation that I was having with Hannah about assuming collective responsibility. And again, we didn't start, and I don't think anybody starts, or very few people start with the assumption that parents are somehow sending us, the worst of their kids and keeping the good ones someplace else or at home or whatever. So this is really a question of how then will we help parents as a state to create the right partnership and get a...
We're sorry. Your conference is ending now. Please hang up.
And to create kind of a level set of both expectations and knowledge as to what parents can do in the support of their children. And so one of the things that has been clear since the early days in the 60s of when Head Start became a federal bill was that parents play an incredibly powerful role in how children are made ready for school. Now, the data on that is, again, there are very few things that are quite completely conclusive in educational research, but this is one of them. And the issue of parenting and schooling have long since been understood as having a symmetry between the two. So this was an effort to recognize that symmetry and to build it out as it relates to specific kinds of things that parents would be able to avail themselves of by virtue of the state's menu. And some of those things would include, well, they're listed there, but some of those things would include the ability for parents to understand the early learning process and what they can do at home to augment the readiness of their child for school. Some of those things pertain to ways by which the system just functions, and how do parents understand how it functions such that they can really make use of it at the opportune time. Some of those queries are about to whom do I go when I have a specific concern or question. Not necessarily just in my own school, what's the name of the person, but where would I go for any of the information that is bigger or maybe even outside of my school? Are there websites? Are there seminars? Are there things that are made available to parents that would give them information in a kind of a just-in-time context? My child is thinking of quitting school because he or she's been bullied. What do I do? Who do I call? Who handles that in the state? Well, things like that oftentimes without some intervention become impediments, both for a parent and a family as also for their child, become reasons why our dropout rate gets to be what it is. So we thought that a way of being able to meet this partnering relationship or to build this partnering relationship was to make available certain kinds of options, if you will, or menus that parents would be able to access, both as they are at points in their lives where they're raising children, young children, or at points in their lives when they're trying to move children through adolescence, and at points in their lives when they're trying to move them into post-secondary and or world of work opportunities. And that we had to reconceptualize our relationship is an ongoing and long-term relationship, and thus we need to have a mechanism or a structure by which to actually honor that long-term relationship with our public. And our public in this instance, I know people generally don't particularly like this concept, but I think of it as functional. Our public, these are consumers, and we need to figure out a way of talking to our consumer base in the same way as lots of people, you get plenty of emails from everybody wanting to send you something, or if you bought something in a store, they want to send you another email catalog or something just because you are now part of their customer base. We need to have a way of talking directly with parents in an ongoing and compelling way about the raising of their children, the movement of their children through the periods of their lives when they need the most help, and the issues that are pertinent to that transition. So that's what this was about.
Anna, go ahead.
I appreciate this one and the Aspire program. Some of the things that we see done, especially in our Title I schools, where there's a real focused outreach to parents, and the goal of getting 100% of parents to attend a parent-teacher conference even is something that's kind of fallen off the table as we've lived through No Child Left Behind, because it was all about the testing. It wasn't about the relationship. And anything we can do to get back to building the relationship between the family, the school, the student, I believe will only help us be more successful and make sure that we're addressing the needs of all of our students. I'm interested in the outcomes here, a survey. Were you thinking of doing a pre-survey and then a post? How do you have the baseline data, I guess, is the question, to show that there's a meaningful increase in the parent engagement?
So this is one that we don't have a metric in place, and so really I sort of described something in pretty vague terms, trying to capture how we might measure it. I think there would need to obviously be a lot more detail and vetting were we to decide that this was the best mechanism for measuring. So again, this is sort of a placeholder for a concept that we would want to get input about how families are feeling in terms of being engaged and supported and provided information.
I'm not sure what percentage of our K-12 districts currently have surveys that they do, but I know some do. It might be interesting to see what they've done and what their maybe changes over the last few years have been. And the second one was, what is the percentage in the last outcome? You've got a 75%, no less than 75%.
Yes, and that actually is another place where that's a little bit of a placeholder, because I haven't seen the data yet from our office, from the Achievement Compact, on where we currently are on that measure. So that, I mean, we need to actually nail that down in terms of figuring out what an appropriate, I don't know where we are at on that measure right now.
So that information, along with what the gaps currently are, would be good to see what's current practice.
Move on to the next initiative then, which is global essential skills for global success.
This particular area speaks to the ability for Oregon to think, to describe the process of 40-40-20 as including the readiness skills for placement, not necessarily just in the pool of graduates at various transition points from high school to community college, or from community college to transfer to then 4-year, but rather the skill set that is required for them to put their feet under the global table. And we have to know a little bit about what that table, what makes up the table, what shapes it. And there are several things that are pertinent to that. All of these have been pretty well researched. One of them is there's a set of soft skills that are part of the global table. How you engage, how you make a friend, how you establish relationships, what kind of a network you have, how do you work in a group, what's your work ethic, how honorable are you. All of those things are part and parcel of a global skill set that we have, at least in public education, not really embraced in any formal way. Another thing that's a part of it is a specific, if you will, understanding and knowledge of disciplines that are part of the global reality. If we've taken care of literacy on the front end, then this suggests science, technology, engineering, and the arts and mathematics. Really, on the other end is where we ought to put our investment footprint. A last thing that I'll mention, but it's not as much spoken to in this, but it just is a part of this that represents the strand of this table that I'm saying metaphorically, is the whole issue of how students actually will network, if you will, or have the social capital to enter the chosen field that they endeavor to go into. How do they actually onboard into that industry, let alone the specific job, but how do you get into the industry? Now, the reason that that's an important strand is that we're seeing a world emerge here where simply having a degree, while it does portend for more income on an annual basis, the data are also pretty clear that not everybody's going to get a job because it's far more competitive. And so the question that I was raising earlier to both the university people and community college people was, all right, so you give someone a degree, and so the degree says XYZ university or college. For that amount of money and for the time you spent, what do you get other than a piece of paper that says, confirms you as a graduate? Do you get entree to the job or to the industry? Do you get networked? Do you get social capital that comes with having graduated from that school? And I'm not talking about if you happen to know somebody from the alumni association, or do you happen to bump into someone who knows you from some other world. That's an accident. I'm talking about, by design, are there ways by which we want to extend ourselves to the businesses of the 21st century such that Oregon students, or even for that matter the Pacific Rim students, should be networked into industries that are, essentially Fortune 500 companies right here on our own backyard, if nothing else. So those strands make up this global table. The one that we took a deeper dive on here is the issue of STEM, or what we're now referring to as STEAM. And the idea here is that we have, in the form of our ESDs, in the form of our colleges and universities, and certainly in the form of our high schools, and a lot of the work that's already been promoted and done very well around the 11 to 14 structure, we now have a potential available, if you will, and again, forgive me, because I know that these things are somewhat troublesome in the way that I may describe them, but you have a labor force here. You have a labor force that has to have onboarding and connectivity into science, technology, engineering, mathematics places, or otherwise those jobs will go to people who do have it. And the biggest fear I have is that jobs that will be coming to this state will be jobs that will be taken, frankly, by people in some other technological framework that represents the fact that we didn't have a trained workforce enough to be able to take advantage of the jobs that are here. So I looked at this as an essential skills for global success because it really says, content-wise, the thing we need to prepare students for in terms of being globally prepared is something in the field of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and the arts. Secondly, the notion of soft skills, I think, is going to be taken up probably in the form of report cards and a whole host of other work that we're already doing to start thinking out loud about, how would we start to look at, the softer skills that people have to go through and become globally competent. And third, the piece of this that I think helps us is that, while we do not have a high school diploma that stratifies itself into sort of, a global high school diploma versus a traditional high school diploma, it certainly leaves us positioned to be able to think globally about readiness, even in middle school and in high school, by virtue of the kind of curriculum that we would put forward for people in that kids in that grade level. So that's the general sense of this whole issue, and the specific mechanism for being able to deliver it we thought would be lab schools, and on the assumption that people might want to have a little bit more deeper description of that. We are now in the process of putting together a sort of a white paper for this that would give you a little bit more chapter and verse and some other models that are both now national and in various other countries, et cetera. But it's a way of being able to kind of give you a better picture of what we're talking about here. But these lab schools would essentially be in, I would think, grades 6 through 14, giving a parent or a child an option for being able to stay in it for a longer period of time, or a long enough period of time, that they would get the kind of social capital that they want. It certainly takes advantage of the early college and dual enrollment kind of credit models that we have. And it also allows for us to build into that span of time things like internships, if you will, community service projects, and the like, that all give students a sense of how to be prepared to do the kind of work that they'll need to do as they then go into their either collegiate or career option. That's it.
So as you were thinking about the lab schools, we had some option programs, and it was the haves and the have-nots of having access to something like that. So when you're talking about lab schools, what were you thinking about needing of, and where would they be located, and how would students be admitted? that deep into what?
No, I'm ready to answer that. So the way that I would think about this is, first of all, quality-wise and pedagogically, they would look a little bit like Bronx High School of Science in New York City. They would be deep in the content. They would be, to some degree, experientially based. They would offer opportunities for students to move and to sort of look at a number of different arenas of that genre that they might find exciting from a career or a college standpoint. Secondly, let me just say that these wouldn't be necessarily developed by me or by my office. They would be the sole developmental sort of owners would be people in the field. This is what I was saying earlier about teachers developing curriculum. You've got some exciting and powerful mathematics and science teachers in this state. Why wouldn't they come forward and start to, on a more entrepreneurial sense, start to build some of this themselves? You've got them at community colleges, and you've got them at higher education institutions across campus. And the idea here would be that we would essentially just simply build criteria that would invite submissions to an RFP. So where they would go, I would like for them to be in various regions around the state, many of which would be in places where there are new developing technologies and or a need for bringing new and different training opportunities for students by virtue of the closure of mills or the closure of an industry, timber industry, and other things that I've seen so far, or in places that have been frankly underserved from an economic standpoint, that they're really dying because their economy is dying. And we need to actually think about how this would work coterminously with economic development at the same time. So I would see us having enough of them, 5 of them or so, that would allow for 5 regions around the state of Oregon to become entrepreneurial in the design and the development of this. And I wouldn't be any more prescriptive than that, to be perfectly honest with you.
So on the outcomes, again, because of the testing, science has been ignored for years, in case people don't all know that. I mean, in the elementary schools, Beaverton bought new science books, but they were basically put on the shelf because there was no time to teach science because they had to focus on literacy and math. So I think we need to be really careful about how we set our targets, because those students have not necessarily, they don't have the base from elementary school moving up because it's been ignored. And I appreciate we've been talking for quite some time now about tight loose, tell us what you want and then let us teach. So I believe that elementary educators want to have the opportunity to teach science, but haven't been given that. So I'm concerned about, I guess to be blunt, I'm concerned about 7th graders being able to move the bar when they don't have a basis for that in some of our districts.
I guess we can, I guess the way I would approach that is that there are lots of ways of starting a conversation about content areas that have been neglected because of NCLB or because of lack of money or because they don't have labs or whatever the case may be. I mean, I've been around that mulberry bush quite a bit. All I know is that once you actually say, we are going to put science and technology and mathematics into a framework that has value and we're going to make an investment in it, then people who are sitting in the offshore shoals of science and technology and mathematics and the work that they've been doing rejoice.
Yep.
They want to come forward and demonstrate their prowess. They want to say, hey, include me. Well, I think that those people are sitting in our community colleges, I think they're sitting in our high schools, and I think that they're sitting completely available in our universities and certainly in our industries. All around here, there are people who I've already met with who are saying, I would love to participate in the building of a pipeline that gives kids entree to everything, not just on the Pacific Rim, but everything that's available in the world of work ever. And that they're completely willing to help us to build that. I don't have, and this is not intended to be the answer, this is intended to just simply be a framing of where we would, the starting blocks. And I think once you say out loud that we've got a clear and undeniable commitment to these global skills and these specific kinds of disciplines, I think you'll see people come from lots of places who want to belly up to the work at hand and put their intellectual capital on the table. Many of them will put their financial capital on the table. So I don't see this as anything more than an all call to both industries that we want to woo to come into the state, and to people from within our own P20 institutions who want to ultimately finally get to do something with the disciplines that they have been so rich in giving to individual students or individual classes. Now they may actually get to do it on a larger scale.
And I agree with that, but the way these are stated, it's like the proficiency. So it's up to the educators to get this. So if we're putting a priority on it, will science class be actually offered? Will there be opportunities? It's something that every district will have in place, that the community will be engaged in the process. I think, again, going back to all of our measurements need to be measurements that include everyone in this game, so that we're all committing to making a difference. And especially in this area, I hear your passion about science and moving students so they have those opportunities, and I agree with that. But it is going to take a whole lot of inertia from others out in the field as well.
Here's what I think it will take, and I think you're right about this, Anna. It's going to take a real dedicated attention to poor children and children of color and children whose first language is not English, who can't spell science. That's what it's going to take. Let me just be completely honest about this. You have to build a whole on-ramp for kids who have no skill in this area, and unfortunately have been in a state where this hasn't been a real focus for a while. You're going to have to build some excitement around the content of science and math and technology. I mean, but you've got Intel right here, you got Google, you got, I mean, if you can't build a good party with them, something's wrong with our balloons, right? So a third thing you have to do is you're going to have to ultimately think about this as a multi-year investment. This isn't a one deal, put a school someplace out in Eastern Oregon. That's not what I'm talking about here. This is build this thing so you actually energize the economy of a community. That's a different question to a university. That's a different question to a teacher. That's a different question to a leader than, how do you improve your science curriculum? Those are two really different things. That's not what I'm doing. Science curriculum will be improved the second you have a reason to invest, in science. The reason you have, and it can't be about a test. This isn't about tests. I thought about trying to do this. The Bronx High School of Science, for example, is an exam school. I don't think this ought to be exam schools. This is just a regular public education institution. Anybody ought to be able to raise their hand and say go. But it means the rest of the system, from pre-K all the way to the time when a child would actually have this as an opportunity, presumably 6th grade. Every single thing on backwards, if you backward map from a curriculum standpoint, all of that has to now be in place for a kid to have a reasonable chance of succeeding in this. So it could be a reason to keep your kid in public education is what it could be.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about the Innovation Lab Network?
Please. Want me to?
Yes.
Or Whitney?
So this opportunity is one similar to something Matt said earlier, which is, do we intend for this to be transformational in the sense that we are looking to other states and countries for some of their best practices? And so this is another place where an existing effort that we were invited to participate in through the Council of Chief State School Officers is this Innovation Lab Network with, I believe, eight other states that are interested in thinking about how we can create systems of teaching and learning, systems of assessment, systems of support on a statewide basis around these efforts in really focusing on the higher order thinking skills, focusing on deeper learning, focusing on the kind of soft skills and transitional skills that we know are necessary for students to succeed in college and career. So really this is just sort of an attempt, a place for us to put that work and really have it find some context. Many of the states are doing something similar to what Dr. Crew just described, in that they are seeding lab schools around different themes, but all with the common goal of promoting a sense of deeper learning, expanded curriculum, more of a hands-on kind of real-world experiential design.
If I could just say one other thing about this, David, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
When we were in the committee, when we were in the forums, and I would hear people come up and say, well, this is just another No Child Left Behind, sort of ploy of sorts. I quietly was taking umbrage at that, because I was thinking there could be nothing further from the truth here. This is not anything constructed in the image and likeness of NCLB. This is finally actually asking people to be entrepreneurial, to take your talent and skill and bring it to the level of building something that doesn't exist at this point. So I just want to make sure you hear that this is not about trying to figure out a way of being able to cause there to be some even as science gets to be measured, it's not about catching people being bad. It's about building a system that doesn't exist.
Yeah, thanks. I got a couple of nitpicking things, and then I got a couple of maybe a little bit more important. Just on the nitpicking, just the title here, 9 through 14, is pretty explicit, and then later we talk about 6 through 14. Right. In the STEM labs specifically, it does beg the question, what are we 9 through 14 or 6 through 14? Similarly, there are times where the language is focused around the community colleges and K-12, and then there's a bullet point that does mention the four-year institutions. I would like to see us to be more consistently including the four-year institutions throughout the language. Again, more nitpicking. The bigger question that I've got, this to me seems to be the real transformational centerpiece of what we're trying to accomplish here. And this is the true P20 integration that is trying to move away from siloed approaches. It says so on the second line. I would have expected this to have been a little bit more front and center with the teacher first initiative, which is teacher support and educator support, to at least to some degree, to be supporting this. Mm-hmm. Because it seems to me that this is going to require new ways of doing business, right, and that would require some retraining. I think that's actually what I was trying to get at earlier, my earlier questions, is that this to me is very transformational. So I would at least offer for consideration a reordering, if not a reprioritization. I think this is where there's a lot of real opportunity that the other initiatives would support. The other, as a comment, question on Dr. Crew and Whitney. If this is really the P20 integration, because it's it is really where we kind of draw that out. And even if we are to go with 6 through 14 as opposed to 9 through 14, is there an implicit assumption here, if not explicit, that the real integration piece is going to start later in the education cycle? I mean, it's been, the way that this reads, it's all about reading and readiness early. It's all about early learning and getting the kids ready for kindergarten. But then the true integration, breaking down those silos and thinking about proficiency, all those concepts, we don't really pick that up until later, at least age, grade 6, if not even grade 9. And I'm wondering if that was deliberate or not. And then the second question is, organization, and I think, Dr. Crew, you described this. I'd ask you, I was writing a lot, so I'd ask you if you could re-describe it. How would we organize to ensure the integration of the 4 institutions, the community colleges, and the districts? I mean, specifically, I think you said it's going to be a regional focus that would then be unleashing innovation or asking them for their innovation, but specifically, how will we organize to get this integration from P20? Because this is a much more functional organization, and then what I'm asking is, if this is a much more functional focus, how are the institutions then going to organize around these outcomes? If that's hopefully clear enough.
The first part of your question, sir, was really the delineation of this continuum over time. The way that if I get the opportunity to do it, the way that I have thought about the P20 continuum, and it may not necessarily always show up yet in our early writing, so I apologize for that. But the way that I would think about it is that the pre-K through about grade 5 is foundation. It is foundational excellence. It is essentially about getting creative thinkers with high levels of proficiency in reading, writing, mathematical computation, and higher order skills to emerge out of that 5th grade foundational year.
Okay.
Right? From 6th through from 6th through arguably 9th grade. I'd like to move that back a year, but I would say for right now about 9th grade. It's really, in my mind, about both awareness and the building off of the foundation of skill, but it's about building a context of going forward. What does it look like for me as I think about my college-going prospects? So it's taking stock, right? But I've got a foundation off of which to work. Now I'm going to start building about my going forward. The rest of the time is really about application of these skills. It's about how do I now onboard and go where I'm going to go. So if I think about those 3 blocks, the way that this lays out is it says, we got to invest in Oregon. We got to invest in getting this foundation right. Hence the early learning and the reading and so on and so forth. We also have to invest in some measure, either by building greater coherence or by virtue of putting in place things that don't exist. But we also have to invest in this, this second block of work around students actually being able to make choices because they're more aware. And the middle school years have been, for the most part, historically, I won't say wasted years, but they've been undefined years. So I look at this as saying, you know what, there's something in here that is about getting at least science, technology, and mathematics out on the table for that, I think, 6th grader, and helping them orient themselves to world of work and global kind of skill thinking, right? And then for the rest of the time, it's about application. So, the question can be as to whether or not we apply ourselves in a community college, if we apply it just to, students who are not looking for a degree, but they just simply want to get as someone said earlier, an accounting course to be able to move forward in their own job. That's an application of skill. It could also be the application of my lifelong love of X, and that's where I want to go. I want to go be a veterinarian, and I want to now know how to go do that, and I've taken necessary courses to complete a degree to do that. I think that that framework offers a lot of hooks for where this work gets associated. And your second question of, you know, where would the, help me, the new...
Well, yeah, so it's just to play that back, and Dr. Crew, it seems that, you know, again, a big part of what we're trying to accomplish here is this integration and really building the pathways and the continuum and so forth. And so partly what I hear from you is that you know, the big silos, I suppose, are, you know, from K-12 to community college and as well to universities. And so a lot of the real work that needs to be done to building that integration actually does occur later, because it's as kids are getting ready to graduate high school and get on to community colleges or universities. So that's where a lot of the magic, the transformation does need to happen.
Right.
Because right now that's where the silos are most pronounced. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
So maybe in that case, if that does make sense, then less focused on proficiency and pathways and so forth earlier makes sense as well. It seems like the greater focus on integration does, you know, is kind of a 9 through 14. So that makes sense. Then the question becomes, the second question is, how in the heck are we going to organize in order to achieve that? There's a comment around considering the Eastern Oregon Promise. That's obviously, it's a pretty simple structure. It's regional. It's very easy to understand because there's a regional focus. Is the idea to kind of expand upon the regional focus in order to drive that, again, 9 through 14 type of integration that we're seeking. So then when we have a Southern Promise and you know, another, is the idea to go statewide, region by region, or how do you?
Yeah, I understand your question. So I don't think that every region has to look like every other region. I don't think that they all will look the same in any dimension, but I do think that they will be attacking the same problems. And so the way that I think of organizing as a sort of an organizing principle for the whole state is that we have to organize for the building of new knowledge and the sharing of new knowledge. I think we need a dissemination network in the state, a way of being able to bring people together, talk about what they're doing and how they're doing it. Secondly, I think that the compacts actually will allow for us, if we do them either on a, even if you did them individually, the fact that they plan for them collectively would be an enormous asset in my mind.
This is just an honest question. It's one I struggle with because I'm intrigued by how this is going to ultimately play out. What's beautiful in Eastern Oregon, you know, being on the board of higher ed, I've watched that since its inception. Partly the beauty of it is the sparse population, so you can actually kind of point to the people that are involved.
Right.
And what it allows is you've got a president of a university with a collection of community colleges and then the school districts. And you can actually point to who's accountable for doing what, and being at what meeting, at what time. I mean, it's very organizable. And so the question is, how do you then organize the other areas of the state beyond Eastern Oregon so that you really have got accountability? I mean, you can actually staff the Eastern Oregon Promise because you can actually know who the members are. You know exactly what the delineations are. What about the other parts of the state? How will the rest of the state again build these pathways? I'm still noodling on that. I don't know what the answer is.
I think it's going to be slightly, as the Eastern Promise was, slightly organic. And I think OEIB has got to play the role of being the host of organic creation. And in some cases, that's an okay place to be. In other cases, I would argue that playing the host is not aggressive enough. that there are outcomes that we definitely want to hit, and thus we need to take a more clear stance in the relationship. But that's only if and when we don't see that there's any real progress being demonstrated any other way organically. The idea here is, the idea of these lab schools is no different if you just simply replaced the Oregon the Eastern Promise. If you replaced that with lab school,
Yep.
you have the same organizing principles. That is to say, you turned it over to people and you let them figure it out. Now, they've got to have some support. They've got to have some constraints. They've got to be able to understand what the budget looks like and what they can't do. But what they can do is well within the specter of their control. And I think we have to give much more of a signal of entrepreneurial ventureship in some of this than we have in the past. That's what I'm saying. This is the antithesis of NCLB. The only place where I think we exercise what's been called a tight here is when people essentially are choosing not to go forward, or they're so dysfunctional as to not be able to go forward. Then I think you've got to step in and actually do something. But beyond that, I think given the right conditions, the churning about of both new ideas with an integrated model, the absence, if you will, of brand new dollars to fix everything, the ability to ask people to rise to the occasion of thinking their way through this and collaborating, puts a huge premium on two things. It puts a premium on how they ultimately will build it in a little different region to region, but it also puts a premium on the notion that this is going to be, we're going to build our way out of this together. No one is going to, this is not a top-down, sort of hierarchical moment. This is about everybody trying to figure this out, but you got to give them the same problem.
Okay, we got to finish up here pretty soon. I want to get to a wrap up, and then we have public testimony, but maybe if you can make this really quick.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Really quick. I have had some questions from community colleges and universities, just what their role is in this. So without taking up too much time, if you could maybe just give a few points on that. I mean, their roles either in the lab schools or in the consortiums or providing research, or just any other way, what their roles would be in this.
I think in terms of the lab schools, community colleges really should be thinking about curriculum development as it relates to technical skills, technical world, the technical trades, the kind of course material that they already have, and how that could be, if you will, translated into a lab school of sorts, some of which they now offer discreetly, but what would the experience look like if you were offering it now at different points in a grade level? So it's not necessarily just community college, but now it could be 8th grade. So what would that look like at a technical level? How would we begin to introduce it, et cetera? I also think the assessment work is going to be extremely important in this. The community colleges actually have to start thinking about how would we assess student knowledge, and critically, how would we assess the soft skills? What else matters to being able to complete a diploma? Or is it just, did you get an A or did you get an F? And the last thing that I think community colleges could and should be doing is bringing, pardon me?
And universities?
And you were asking me to, yes, I would include universities in what I'm saying as well. I thought you were just asking me about community colleges. But the last thing is, you've got human resources here. You've got the talent of professors, members of the faculty across campus whose expertise in this and whose linkages and if you will, relationships with business and industry could be enormously valuable if we actually put it on the table and gave it a framework that essentially is akin to this kind of lab school. What would internships look like? Who knows people in the business and technical trades? And how do we actually start formalizing that so that young people get a chance to really both know and experience this differently?
Thank you. If, just to summarize, and members of the committee can add to this or help me revise this if needed. For the next meeting, I would like to prioritize these. And some information that would be helpful, that would be some research on the effects of school libraries and school librarians on reading and reading improvement. And I think also to look at all these initiatives from the comments of the committee members, and of course to help take them into context of the current structure and funding of our schools, but that we need for each of these initiatives to be a little more fleshing out on some long-term and short-term outcomes and details, particularly to help prioritize within those initiatives and among the initiatives some of the long-term and short-term details as we're going through this. What's on the 10-year or should be or could be on a 10-year plan, and what really, really should be in the next biennium or 2 biennia. And also that we have to look at the outcomes both at a macro and a micro level. And that would be helpful too, if we could help start isolating those and looking at them as a micro and macro level, and particularly looking at those outcomes and then their connection to the proposals themselves, maybe a clearer connection between both the micro, macro, I think particularly the macro outcomes, and some of the proposals in the initiatives. Would you add anything else?
So if we have suggested language for these, are you asking for us to send that in, or is staff just going to write it and then we're going to look at it at the next meeting?
I think we should do that writing over this next week then. Through the end of this week. The next meeting's when? November 7th? So
I wanted just to get some clarification,
okay.
David, because a place where I think there's a little bit of tension is between the fleshing out of details here and the ability to engage the field or the folks that we want to be involved in these initiatives in figuring out the details. And so I guess, as Dr. Cruz said earlier, in part, we're trying to keep it to the level of just describing the kinds of priorities and focuses, but to allow for some of that detail to happen on the ground level. I think otherwise we would end up having some really kind of constricting initiatives. So I just want to sort of check in with the committee on whether that, where you see these needing more detail and where we could maybe think about leaving it as some sort of criteria that would then be answered by the field or responded to by the field.
is that okay, some openness there, or making the point in the detail this would be answered better in the field as we progress in specific details?
I think, David, I appreciate you. I think you're being responsive to my request around strategic investment, number one. And I guess my only, I think I like the criteria-based approach and allow them to figure out the how. But the one thing, it's just, it did seem that you might want to put some language, if we have the outcomes around the diversity increasing by 10%, I just would encourage you to find some language up above that talks about somehow, what are the expectations of these, of these 4 to 6 centers is to do that.
Right.
I guess that was the only.
And I'll direct you, Member Donegan, just to the single sheets are updated. They're cleaned up a bit, and so you might. They still need some work, but you might find them a little bit easier to follow than the piece that was in the funding team recommendation.
And shall the members of the subcommittee then start adding our comments to the existing 4 initiatives we have and sharing them? And Whitney, you also fleshing out those details and outcomes, also contributing to that with an eye towards having a final draft by this Friday?
And I can do that in red line so we can see.
Okay, and all of us together working on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Hannah.
I had on my calendar, did we cancel the meeting on the 1st?
We have a meeting on the 1st, right? One on the 1st.
Oh, we do have a meeting on the 1st.
I thought so.
Okay, I was told the meetings were moved to the 7th.
I think that's,
Was that just the other committee?
That this morning.
Okay.
We'll get that clarified, because I know there was an issue with someone not being able to attend Saturday.
Well, we'll
Yeah,
need-
and I asked repeatedly to have that looked at because that date does not work well, and we weren't asked if it would work. So if we can change the 1st,
to the 7th, the morning of the 7th.
I don't know. I'm not sure, when does the governor want recommendations from us?
The OEIB meets on November 7th.
Yes.
And at that meeting, he would like the OEIB to weigh in on this topic.
How's Friday?
We're meeting on Friday.
Okay. And Thursday's not, that's not good.
No.
Shall we do it the morning of the OEIB meeting, the 7th?
I can do that.
Okay.
Morning of the 7th?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe one committee 8 to 10 and the best practices 10 to 12, something like that, or vice versa?
Yeah.
The same order we're having this morning, perhaps?
Yeah.
Okay. Then we'll move on to public testimony. If there's no further comments from the committee members. Okay. Chris Allman, please. Three minutes, be fine?
Sure. Nice to meet you,
Nice
Dr.
to meet
Crew.
you.
My name is Chris Allman. I'm just going to be talking extemporaneously because I'm just ingesting what I've heard and wanting to speak to some of the things, the issues. First, I want to start out with this idea of how investments are going to be planned and potentially taking a 4-year look. That deeply concerns me because we already know that each year a child we delay on investing in kids, it creates that many more years that these kids could be left behind. So that's one comment. The other issue is the highly qualified teacher. In the Beaverton School District, that has been totally upended. And I am understanding that in that district, they are getting pushback from teachers who are wanting to see trades within the next year and are feeling limited by contractual obligations. I bring that to your attention because I think that, again, is putting another year on the plate where kids are going to be not served well. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was echoing what Hannah mentioned, the issue of science being neglected. Similarly, this is true of math. I see reading put on a high priority, but if in fact we're going for STEAM, this is not reflecting a holistic approach toward education in general, and that really troubles me. When we talk about lab schools, and you brought up specifically the Bronx School of Science, I want to clarify and hope you say what you mean, that it shouldn't be an exam school, that this is reflecting what I saw in an article in the Huffington Post. Alan Singer was basically pointing out that because there were so many kids vying for these positions, going to private programs to get tutored, the numbers of Latinos and children of color was grossly underrepresented. And so that is a concern of mine as we think about these kind of high-stakes schools that you might, I don't have any problem with them, but I do worry about access. And then I wonder about the hubs. Are they going to be based on the location of the data warehouses? To what degree? Is any of this going to put confidential data at risk? I like the idea of it. I was a Washington County Commissioner on Children and Families. This was something that I saw as an important way to try to consolidate how teachers can work together and come up with great ideas. But I do worry about data breaches. Just this past summer, Eugene had a huge data breach. It's going to escalate as we more and more put data into our data stores from every level, from the institution to a lot of laptops that teachers have. And as a physician, I know how much that has been a problem in that sector. So I just worry about every step of the way where there are going to be data breaches, and what are we going to do to respond to them, to prepare for them, as PTAC is advising, and those are some of my issues. Plus, how much are we expending on data, on virtual education, and what are we going to do to track it, to know that we're not literally taking all our dollars from the classroom to technology, which hasn't been proven, which Intel has in a white paper stated that. So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anything for the good and welfare? I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.